He had earned the right to marry her through his deeds. However, it was thanks to Jinshi that they had been able to return here afterward. It also seemed increasingly likely that Jinshi knew what Fayu had been doing in the rear palace. Perhaps he was just a soft touch. He had a sentimental streak he could not quite shake. Being kind is good for a person, but it can be a weakness for a man of power. It will hold him back. We saw the same thing with how he treated the doctor. He was using the doctor, but only because he valued sentiment so much. Jinshi often underestimated his own abilities. He does manage to do things, though. He simply took on too much responsibility. Things would improve for him if he could be a little more flexible, but instead he continued to offer his assistance. The more he believed he could help others, the more involved he became until his efforts were spread too thin. I know someone else who is just like that. She thought of the person she was always chasing after. He spent himself in the service of others as well. He was the man Maomao respected more than anyone. I guess it is my fault the quack got mixed up in all of this. It was Maomao who would take it the hardest if Liu Men found himself in danger. Jinshi had proven himself a kind-hearted politician, and yet he was still naive. That is why he was able to be such a complete ass. Why had Jinshi done something so idiotic? Empress Jayakayo had said, "You are half responsible for this." Jinshi had a strong sense of duty. Maomao might have expected him to be less impulsive. She might have thought he could have waited until the princes were a little older. It turned out he could not. Some people just have the weirdest tastes, she thought for the umpteenth time. Jinshi often seemed to enjoy creatures with unusual personalities. The otherworldly little master had been unable to find a new toy among all the people around him. He was like a baby chick, and he imprinted on a single toy. It became his entire world. If I am just a thing to him, then he should treat me as one and order me around. The naive child could not manage that, so he chose a crueler method instead. When Jinshi burned the brand into his side, the one who hurt the most was not himself, but the Emperor, Maomao thought. She had found her hypothesis turning to suspicion, and then suspicion turning to certainty. She began to think she knew the true relationship between Jinshi and His Majesty. The Emperor is Jinshi's real father. Jinshi had lived his life as the imperial younger brother, but if he was actually the Emperor's supposedly dead son? Was it really what he had done? The question created a shadow of doubt in Maomao's mind. If her suspicion was correct, what then? What should she do? Even as she asked herself the question, she felt she already knew the answer. "You can step forward now," said Su'en, giving her a gentle push. Maomao wasn't sure she liked the pregnant tone in the old woman's voice. She said, "I see you wanted me to know what became of Lady Fayu," and bowed to Jinshi. For the moment, she took the other thoughts she'd been having and stashed them in the corner of her mind. She thought, not exactly. "I simply thought you might benefit from knowing, since I did ask you for help with her." "Yes, sir. I admit I feel somewhat better having seen this." Maomao glanced around. She could not escape the sense that Jinshi was trying to be thoughtful toward her. All right, time to play the game. She looked over at the balcony. "This is quite a sumptuous room, sir. It even has a balcony. You like it. Feel free to go out and have a look. If I may then." She trotted straight for it. "Zairomo." Gaeshan tried to stop her, but she could just see Jinshi holding him back from the corner of her eye. She stepped out onto the balcony. She had thought this would be the perfect place to be assassinated by an arrow or a Pfeiffer gun. However, that turned out not to be true. There are so many trees around, it would be hard to get a good shot. There was nowhere to shoot from nearby. It seemed to her that the balcony had been deliberately designed to be safe. She was no expert, but she supposed that anything else would have been inappropriate in a VIP's room. Because it was safe, no one followed Jinshi when he stepped onto the balcony with her. Taomei was speaking to Gaeshan. It was clear he was no match for his wife. "I'm not sure I like the feeling that we are being set up." She was alone with Jinshi. That was not so strange. She would have to examine his burn later, but she wanted to do it before her mood changed. "I hear you went into town today," Jinshi said. "Yes, sir. The townspeople have much to say about Li. The locals could hardly be called favorably disposed, but at least things did not seem about to explode. At least they were favorably disposed enough that they might send a woman to a guest of state. Master Jinshi, please be careful tonight." As every night Maomao said, there was always a risk that some woman might try to invite herself into Jinchi's bed. I never can guess what you are going to say next. Jinchi leaned against a wall, hidden from his attendants. Gaeshan was not the only one being careful around Taomei. Surely you can understand what I mean, sir. Just think about your nights at the rear palace. Jinchi groaned and he looked upset. He did have some idea of what she meant. He looked at her as if he had something to say but couldn't quite get it out. Finally, he managed to hem. As you can see, Princess Fayu has come home. The King of Arnon's niece will be entering the rear palace. I hesitate to say in exchange, but it sounds very busy. Yes. Empress Jayukao's niece is also expected to attend. I heard that, sir. It is interesting that you did. Remind me who ran away from the rear palace, Maomao asked. You are no longer Jinchi, Master Jinchi, and I think it would be best if you stopped worrying about the rear palace and focused on your own work. I would agree, but I cannot seem to cut myself off completely. Maomao looked at him, unimpressed. He managed to meet her gaze, but he did not look very comfortable. Maomao found herself angry again. Master Jinchi, you are a man of power, and I think it is time you behaved like it. I know, you should use the things that are available to you. I am. In that case, Maomao stepped up to him and smirked, standing on her tiptoes to look him right in the face. She slammed her right hand against the wall, trapping him. His eyes widened. I can't say I enjoy being used. However, she said, lowering her voice so that only Jinchi could hear, half-assed attempts at being nice are a far greater nuisance. I would much prefer to be a useful tool than a meaningless burden. Your hesitation reflects the hesitation of the entire country, and a moment of indecision from you could mean the deaths of tens of thousands of your subjects. I know you will only regret that. So you might as well pick a path and throw yourself headlong down it. Finally, she leaned away from him. If you are going to use something, then use it. Medicine does not work unless you take it. She closed her eyes and let out a long sigh. Everything she had kept inside came pouring out of her mouth. Maomao was not a princess, she was a common apothecary. If he was going to control her, it was better he simply go ahead and do it. He should use her until she fell apart. If she could escape all of it, of course she would have liked to, but she wasn't going to harm herself to spite her face. She wanted to say more, but she felt she had pushed things as far as she could. She realized there was something else behind her anger. Her hands went to Jinchi's cheek. You are only human, Master Jinchi. You are not a mythical immortal who can save everyone. She held his face in her hands, and the fingers of her left hand brushed his scar. You can be wounded, scarred, brought low. You are only human. Who was she talking to? She knew Jinchi was standing in front of her, but for some reason she kept seeing Liu Humen's face. No wonder I am so upset. The principle that drove Jinchi's behavior seemed very similar to Liu Humen's. She was afraid that if he went on like this, he would end up just as luckless in life as her old man. Just like Pops, he had spent himself trying to rescue everyone and everything. He was, Maomao thought, a bit of a fool. He should have wanted more, been greedier, but instead he accepted his fate patiently. He suffered, and for what? To become an old man resigned to his empty hands. This was, it was fair to say, Maomao's one criticism of her father. She had felt this strongly during her time with the Cheyennese shrine maiden. She respected Liu Humen greatly. A man who did not lose his kindness, even when facing unhappiness, was a true miracle. However, the price he paid was that both his body and his heart were often battered. He eventually became accustomed to doing everything with the expectation of defeat. Would Jinchi end up like him one day? Or please don't go doing anything else like burning a brand into your skin, Maomao said. I heard you the first several times, Jinchi replied. Are you sure? A smile appeared on Maomao's face, and she slowly pulled her hands away. She noticed his hands remained on her cheeks. Jinchi kept them there. Please let me go, sir, she said. Don't want to. He sounded like a child. It was something he did sometimes, using childlike language. I would like to be going back soon, she said, just a few more minutes. Master Gaeshan must be beside himself. Then just rejuvenate me a bit. Rejuvenate. He released her hands and spread his arms wide. Oh no. Is he coming in for a hug? She was just about to tell him she would do no such thing, but the outstretched arms didn't reach for her. Instead, they shifted as if ready to receive something. What exactly do you want? Maomao asked. I wanted a hug, but I thought that at this moment perhaps I need something else. Jinshi scratched his left cheek, the one without a scar. Bigger, help me out. You want me to slap you, as hard as you can, the way you slapped that lady in waiting at the Crystal Pavilion. His eyes were sparkling. What was she supposed to do now? And what was he doing, remembering her worst possible moments? Have you already forgotten what I said? She had just warned him not to do anything like that again, and hardly a minute later here he was engaging in more self-destructive behavior. I understand, he said. This won't leave a scar, it will leave a mark. Maomao would be the one who got in trouble. They had trusted her enough to leave her alone with Jinshi. She could not betray that trust. Please, I can't, I am asking you. Jinshi slumped to his knees. He almost spat as he said, there is no one who can tell me what to do anymore. Gershan and Suhan could scold him as much as they wanted, but they were still his servants in the end. The only person who could possibly contradict Jinshi to his face was the Emperor. No one to tell you what to do, huh? Jinshi's request to be reduced to a commoner would mean severing his connection to the ruler. Maomao thought about what their relationship was like, and how they talked to each other. From what she had gathered, they seemed to have a good rapport as royal blood relatives went. But you reap what you sow. That would explain why he didn't want her to take it easy on him. Maomao could only sigh. Fine. Close your eyes, thank you. Maomao pulled her hand back and whacked Jinshi across the face. It was not a quiet slap. Jinshi sucked in a breath and was about to open his eyes, so Maomao placed her hand gently over his eyelids. She said, let me see it. Her hand hurt, so Jinshi's cheek must be burning. She could see the flush rising on it. Sugan will never miss this. Whether the old lady got upset would depend on how Jinshi reacted. Pain, pain, go away, Maomao said, recalling a rhyme her older sister Perrin had often used on her. She kissed the reddened cheek very gently. Her lips were colder than her fingertips, and they made the cheek feel even hotter. I know a children's verse cannot actually work. It was funny, though. Somehow the cheek looked less red than before. No, that could not be true, and it was not so. Jinshi's entire body was a much redder shade than before. Maomao lifted her hand from his eyes. He could not quite meet her gaze, but his hands clasped hers firmly. Maomao, he said. Yes, sir, she answered, drawing back just a little. The other side as well, please. He pointed at his right cheek, the one with the scar. Maomao glowered at him. Absolutely not, sir. Epilogue. Maomao looked out the small window. She could see more and more ships come into view. Their fleet seemed to grow larger with every port they called at. Most of the additions were merchant vessels. They were also going to the western capital and presumably joining them to help protect themselves from pirates. It was funny. This trip has felt very long, but we can finally see our destination. What are you talking about, Miss Chu? The quack asked. Chu was lounging in the medical office as if she belonged there, which she often did. Oh, nothing. It just seemed like the right thing to say. You say the strangest things. I just don't follow, said the quack. Maomao agreed that Chu's pronouncements could be obscure. However, there were a handful of creatures like her in the world. Maomao stepped away from the window. She intended to take inventory of their remaining stock of medicine. As Chu explained, they would soon arrive in the western capital. They needed to think about restocking their supplies. However, the quack, who was key to the medical office's function, spent all his time chatting as he always did. Now, Chu spent as much time in the medical office as Lihaku did. She insisted it was for work. Perhaps she mispronounced counting work. Master Physician, if you could take some notes about our quantities of medicine, Maomao said, pressing a notebook and brush into the doctor's hands. It was not a big job and she could easily have done it herself. However, she thought it was important not to spoil the doctor. Want me to help? Chu offered. No, thank you. We will never hear the end of it if we let non-medical staff touch the medicine. That is too bad. Miss Chu knows a lot about poisons, you know. She also never missed a chance to promote herself. Maomao supposed she was trying to justify her continued presence in the medical office and absence from real work. Enough to do food tasting, at least, I see, Maomao said. She thought back to the banquet in Arnon. Then there was the case of the missing quack. After that she had slapped Jinshi. That last one was a real problem for her. Maomao put a hand to her lips. Why did I do that? She knew perfectly well that children's charms did not have any medicinal effect. She had treated Jinshi as if he were a child easily fooled by a little charm. Fortunately, the people in the room did not seem to have heard anything. Perhaps the balcony had been built specifically for secret conferences like this one. Maomao had been worried about what would happen if Sugen, Taomei or Gaoshun had overheard them. However, only Chu had shown any interest. As for Jinshi's request that she slap the other side as well, he had simply needed something to wake him up. It wasn't a masochist thing, he had explained. What else was I supposed to think, looking at his face? He said he had given himself a good, hard slap on the cheek right before coming back into the room. That was his story for the red mark on his face. Surin and the others were aghast, but he simply chuckled. He explained that he just needed to make sure he was good and alert. Maomao had remained absolutely silent. It was all she could do. She was very, very tired. Chu said, "Ooh, I had such a good time in Arnon. I can't wait to see how much fun we have in the Western capital." Her small eyes were sparkling. She produced little flowers, flags, and even doves from her hands. Lehaku and the quack had already handled the witty comebacks about those things. Maomao did not need to get involved in that game now. She did have a question, though. "How are you doing that? Oh ho, are you interested in Miss Chu's mysterious abilities?" She snorted proudly with her bean bun nose. "Yes. In my experience, abilities like these usually require some preparation." She had seen the White Lady do similar things on stage. However, the White Lady's tricks involved less preparation than a knowledge of human psychology. Chu asked, "What would you do if I told you?" Maomao replied, "I thought they might be perfect for when the bigwigs ask me to entertain them." Her brothel jokes often seemed to fall flat, so a little performance seemed ideal. It was even better if it could help take the tension out of a situation. "I'm sorry to burst your bubble, but I've already shown the Moon Prince what I can do on this trip. If you're thinking of amusing His Majesty, I did this for him before we left. He could help me decide where to go with them in the future." Where to go? The quip almost escaped Maomao's mouth, but she forced it back. Chu was truly a woman who knew no propriety. Maomao emptied out bags of medicine, made the quack take notes, then put them back in the chest. They did this again and again. "Oh, I haven't told you about our upcoming schedule yet, have I?" Chu said. "So you do have an actual job here," said Maomao, who had been certain Chu was just slacking off. "Yep, Miss Chu always works hard so her mother-in-law won't get mad at her." She straightened up and fished a roll of wood strips out of the folds of her robes. "Goodness, you're behind the times, Miss Chu. You should get some nice paper, it is much easier to use," said the quack, stretching his fingers. He came from a family of papermakers, and he sounded pleased to be in the know. "Nopers, I'm a woman of elegant taste and I love the old ways. I adore the texture of wood, I savor its smell." Paper was convenient, but there were plenty of aesthetes like her who preferred the virtues of wood. Maomao didn't really understand it herself. She also didn't have a reason to stop Chu from writing on whatever she wanted. She was curious about how Chu had managed to conceal such a lengthy scroll in her robes. "When we reach port, we will get in a carriage with our luggage. It should be about a 30-minute ride to the Western capital. You are advised to look out for scorpions." Maomao nodded, hoping that there would in fact be scorpions. "Once we get to the Western capital, the quack Master Physician is to join up with the other doctors. You will go with him, Maomao. Someone will show you to the room where the medical staff will be based. It is somewhere in Master Jiaoquan's villa. All of you will not be able to fit in there at once, so you will be divided into 3 groups. Also, the higher-ups will all be together. You will just have to live with it." Did she say quack? She hadn't done a very good job of covering for herself, but the quack was so busy writing that he didn't seem to have noticed. "Miss Maomao, you are going to be working with the other doctors for the most part, except when summoned for things like food tasting. I think you will be seeing a lot of me and Lehaku." Lehaku was the quack's bodyguard, but what about Chu? Perhaps she was a messenger. It mostly seemed to Maomao like Chu was trying to find an excuse to cut work and avoid seeing too much of her mother-in-law or the big lady, but she politely pretended not to realize it. She did not want Suhin to get involved at all. It would be a disaster. "One more thing," she said, "I'm off the clock at night, so please do not call for me then." "What, not even in an emergency?" the doctor asked. He continued to work, his brush moving quickly in his plump hands. "Not even then." My mother-in-law is rushing me about the second child, so I must use my most transcendent techniques. She managed to say this with a straight face. The quack doctor was perplexed at first, but when Maomao said Miss Chu is a married woman, he seemed to understand. His face went beet red and he dropped his brush. Maomao was surprised he had survived as the rear palace's physician, given that reaction. Still, knowing that Chu's husband was literally the man behind the curtain, Maomao questioned whether he could fulfill his role. Fu, now big, deep breaths. Chu had squatted down and was gliding her hands around her stomach. Maomao interrupted her.